Welcome back to Dusting History. Today's picture is a picture of a lighthouse worker from 1906, and it looks like he's generated his own self-portrait here. Love this picture. It reminds me of that film The Lighthouse. I don't know if you've seen that, but that was the reason why I wanted to clean this one up. Now, as you can see, there's a lot of damage in the sky, and what's interesting about that for me is the sky is very, very pale, and that damage is really hard to see. So I start off by putting a levels adjustment layer there, and it really highlights the areas of loss. Also, you can see how heavily compressed this image is. The little squares, the up and down and left and right squares, are a function of JPEG compression. So I like to go into a neural network and turn off the JPEG compression, or actually modify it, I should say, and get it to try and fix it. And with this level adjustment layer turned on, you can see that the remove tool does a great job of removing this damage, but when you zoom in, it's creating patches where it hasn't generated a good enough copy of the grain. Generates a whole bunch of unwanted colors. So to try to get to the damage and also preserve the grain, I've tried a frequency separation, and you can see here I'm painting in between those two layers, the soft focus bottom layer and the high frequency top layer, just with a straight up paintbrush. And whilst it looks fairly aggressive in terms of painting, when you take that adjustment layer off the top, it's also pale and so subtle, it actually it doesn't do too badly. So I'm just painting with levels of grey. And now painting on the high frequency layer, you can see I'm not painting directly, I'm actually clone brushing. I'm clone brushing good grain from one part of the image to parts of the image where the grain has been damaged by a dirt or a dot or a tear. And so working this way, I can preserve the grain and I can flatten out the color of the sky as two independent processes that then combine back into a more pleasing, more evenly graded sky. Now, after a bit of a curves adjustment there to put a bit of dynamic range in the image, I'm just going to work through it with the remove tool on the main part of the image and remove all the blemishes and dots and damage. Now, while this took a bit of time, and I've sped this up enormously, what's really fascinating is I took this into palette.fm, or palette.fm, and got it to generate a color palette for me, and it did a remarkably good job on it, to the point where you'll see later when I bring it in, I only have to do some touch-ups. I make some color choices and some adjustments, but this is an example of putting a lot of the effort here into cleaning up the original black and white, but then the actual AI guess of color, particularly on the rocks, blew me away. I'll just quickly toggle on and off the damage so you can kind of see it was subtle, but you could also see when I zoomed in there was an appreciable amount of it. And having gotten rid of most of that damage, I can now go into Topaz Photo AI and actually do a small sharpen on the image. And I'm trying to ignore face sharpening by a lot. I'm just trying to sharpen up some of the details of the building and the rocks and the surrounds. A few last minute cleanups. Sometimes the photo sharpening actually highlights some spots and damage that you missed before. Almost puts like a little high frequency ring around them. So here, as I said before, is the color that I did in Palette FM. You can see the wood and the rocks are fantastic. But I would like to modify some of the colors, particularly flatten out some of it. What these AI palette programs do is they scatter quite a bit of color noise around, which sometimes works well, but sometimes on a flat building like this, I'd prefer it to be a more sympathetic singular color. I do go back in and modify it again later, but you can kind of even see the top right corner there of the building had an intense blue on it, and it's not quite sure all the time of what all the parts of the building are, or people, or what's an arm and what's a piece of wood. So I just go through and tidy all that up. I had in my mind that I'd put a very faint yellow onto the wood, onto the metalwork, and then come back and put a flat white onto the window sills. But you can see that white is so subtle, you could hardly tell that I did it. What I do want to do is preserve that sense of ghosted objects inside the windows. So I'll come back in a second with a blue and put some blue on the glass to signify reflecting the sky dome, but then also go and subtly put some browns and greens where I think there's a pot plant or a piece of furniture inside. It's right about now I realised that Photoshop Beta had some kind of error in it, and when I was putting down a brush stroke, it was actually stamping down a little to the right of the brush. And so I was trying to paint that downpipe, realising I was just putting a rusty colour on the building instead. So I changed back to the original Photoshop, which currently also has a bug with the colour mixer. So it wasn't great. This is another example you can see of the colour being a little splattered with multiple colours, and I do like a bit of that. I don't get rid of it entirely, but his sleeve I should say, has got warm tones and cool tones and some purples and greens and all sorts of things, which is quite natural, but I like to put like a 50% wash of a single colour back over the top just to tidy it up a bit, make it a bit more cohesive. So as you can see, I'm being careful not to damage what really works in the palette, but just to unify some things. Things like this barrel that was half blue and half brown, just making it feel a bit more unified. The one thing I am not too happy with is how red his face is. He looks quite beetroot, and whilst the tone would suggest that he has a fairly dark face, it was fairly dark in tone, I intend to take some of that saturation away. So I'll find, what I normally do is find a sort of a donor face, somebody online lit from a similar way, similar kind of lighting, not in direct sun, and I'll just sample some of the colours from that figure here and there and just try to even out the face of my subject. Putting a little bit of a grey stubble on his skin where he would have shaved, putting a little bit more grey into his beard and into his hair, and also just knocking those really rich reds out of his face. And I think that's a lot more sympathetic. So really the colour here has been dead simple. It's just been to taste that I've been modifying it. And that doesn't always happen. I've always glad when it does happen. It makes my life easy. And yeah, so I can't really take too much credit for this. And just like that, this is done. Here's the original with the subtle damage in the sky. And hopefully a relatively subtle palette or a muted palette, but one that really, really brings the image to life. Thanks for joining me this time. We'll see you again soon. Bye.